Was Dan Hardy right about his call to step out and yell at Herb Dean? The stoppage we'll get into, we'll break down what happened, but we need to think about like what's okay, why it happened, and where we go from here. So to catch us all up to speed and like kind of go over the basic events after rewatching the fight several times, especially the stoppage. It was a pretty back and forth fight. Francisco Trinaldo fought Jai Herbert in a pretty back and forth fight. This got to the third round, so there was a lot of action. Jai Herbert had his moments. Trinaldo had his moments. Even had his back, had some good like grappling exchanges. But in the third round, Trinaldo lands a looping left overhand that just obliterates him. Like it hits him and it like bounces his head. It's kind of surreal to see. You need to go rewatch this exact moment because it's like instantly he's like he's out. And he kind of like just wobbles, and it's not just like leg wobble, like it's like he's lost complete control of his body and doesn't look like he knows where he's there, where he is. And he collapses, and he doesn't even, like, you know, when you get hurt, a lot of guys who get hurt, they will fall to their back and go to guard, have their hands up, but they'll be in guard. Herbert's not in guard. He kind of actually falls to his side and is essentially giving up side control, and his hands up, which says he knows something bad is happening. So like he might we don't know where he was in his head. I haven't seen any posts yet from him specifically, but his hand was up, but he was turned away in an awful position, like super bad. And Trinaldo walks up and he looks at Herb Dean, and Herb Dean's like, I'm not going to stop it. And Trinaldo's like, okay. And you already hear Dan Hardy and Paul Felder. They've been rising. You can hear the emotion in their voices. To quote them, you hear Hardy scream, come on, stop the fight. And he's like yelling. This isn't like just commentary, and it's not just excitement. He's kind of angry. And you hear Felder pretty high, but not as much. That's the second time, and then he kind of drowns out over like just the loudness. You can tell they're very upset. They're both fighters. They've both been on the end of bad officiating at times. They know what happens to a man who gets knocked out like that. So you can tell why they're upset. We're aware that Herb Dean is one of the best in the business. He's one of the most veteran referees MMA has ever seen. He's up there with Big John, Dan Mergliotta. He's the Mount Rushmore of refereeing. He's great. People have questioned him as of late, but like there's no actual reason. He's pretty fantastic. But in this specific case, now my personal take is that this is a terrible stoppage. Like, I don't see any good argument for it being a good stoppage. I haven't seen a single one that remotely makes me think, oh, I might be wrong. Like that makes me question this is a bad stoppage. You can argue he wasn't completely knocked out. There's things like that, but not one has remotely said this is a good stoppage. So if we can all generally agree bad stoppage, we can kind of get past that. You could go back and forth, but for the most part, most people agree not the best stoppage. We'll get into Herb Dean, who has responded to this as well, and Dan Hardy, but remember, I have bad opinions about MMA. I am not a professional MMA fighter. I'm not a referee. I have no expertise specifically in that. Just longtime fan. Person who likes to choke people, get choked. Don't have lots there. But I think most would agree pretty bad on the stoppage end. It looked like he had completely given up. But we have to remember again, Herb has a different perspective than us, and people will argue that he has the closest view. But that's not necessarily the best view. And there's a reason we don't watch MMA fights from the POV, the perspective of a referee. It's not the most entertaining, it seems. We've seen Pride, I think, and Dream have referee cams, maybe Ryzen. I'm not sure on that exactly. Don't quote me, but I know we've seen it in some Japanese MMA. But there's a reason we don't. It doesn't give you the best view in a lot of ways. It doesn't give you the big picture sometimes. And, I mean, the angles, like, you've seen referees having to dodge things, and it's not always the best. So we can't use that specifically. So you can cut Herb some slack there. Now, I think we can agree that the commentary team's job is not to call out referees or judges generally. Like, I mean, in most sports, it's not their job. But we do have a weird structure with the UFC where it's kind of all under one umbrella. Not many organizations, sporting organizations, are like this, so it gets kind of muddy between commission, UFC, and commentary broadcast teams. I mean, specifically in this case, because we're in the UAE, we're in Abu Dhabi, and it's like this like self-governing island situation with the UFC, which is unique for this case, but it does muddy the waters a bit. As the senior editor of MMA Junkie Dave Doyle, I like Dan Hardy as much as anyone, but announcers in any sport should not be getting in the face of officials, no matter what you think of their call. Now, I think we can agree on that usually. If we saw a bad hit in football, American football, or we saw a guy poke a guy in the eye in European football, and like the referee just ignored it and he saw it, they're just making bad calls, and they might have some physical outcomes that are bad for the players. None seem to be as bad as MMA, obviously the stakes are much higher, but generally speaking, you don't see it that often. Occasionally you'll hear comments, but usually it's not done. But MMA is in this different sphere where the stakes are that much higher. So we're trying to understand a little bit, like we can agree probably that Dan Hardy, it's not his place to do that. But when the stakes are this high, I think most people can understand his behavior. If we agree on the first point that Dan Hardy saw a bad stoppage, you can see why he acted that way. I mean, I personally as a fan, I've seen stoppages where I'm sick, I'm nauseous. I mean, a one that comes to mind is Chris Weidman against Mark Munoz. It was unbearably bad stoppage. Now, he never went unconscious. Munoz, it is. Chris Weidman elbowed him, dropped him, and then hit him from the back. Like he had seatbelt position from the back and hit him, I don't know how many times. But it was gross. And it was one of those times where you question being an MMA fan. And there's always the violence people, but it makes you question things. Because that's what referees do. They make it where it's safe enough that we can do this wonderful sport, this beautiful chaos. So when they mess up, it takes you to that realm of, oh God, this could be bad. But that's a good example of one of those stoppages where you just feel awful at the end. And maybe some of you don't feel that way about this one, because the overall damage doesn't seem to be as much, and it didn't get let on as long. But you can understand his emotion. You can understand why he was so upset with Herb, because he respects Herb Dean. You know that he understands he's a great referee. It's a serious situation that I think people don't understand that well. Like when it's not the same as other sports. It's not the same as soccer, European football, American football, baseball, rugby. It's not the same. But something that I think bleeds into this is how MMA fans, fighters, and I mean the MMA community feels about MMA officiation. Now, this isn't a reflection on Herb Dean. This is just, I think most people would agree officiation in MMA is bad in a lot of ways. Now, some people this is my opinion. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe most people don't agree with me. I think they do. I'm sure that some officiation people, the NSAC, someone would maybe disagree with me. The CSAC, they might think they're doing a great job. I don't think they're all doing bad jobs, but generally I think it is slow-moving, bureaucratic, and not very forward-thinking, and not always the safest. A good example of this is Chas Skelly being one of the first people to get a fight overturned from a bad stoppage. And it's different than this situation specifically because it's a submission and it shouldn't have been. This is kind of the opposite. It should not have been stopped. But the point is bad officiation in fights. And they're not always on the purpose of the referee. The point I'm trying to make here is we can't always say what happens by the ref is the last call in some ways. And it's a reflection on how many issues we have with the bureaucracy of commissions. And since it's all scattered, we have the unified rules that are even scattered. It's weird with all the little variables, the new rules, the old rules. But officiation is bad. So Chas Skelly's fight with Bobby Moffett from 2018, where he was in I believe a Darce choke, and it was deep. But Chas Skelly is one of those guys who tends to go to sleep in it. Like he's going to probably go to the very end or very close to it. And it didn't look like he was going out. It looked tight. And it didn't look like he was going to tap, but the referee stopped it. And as soon as they let go of that submission, he popped right back up. And now, I think it's been almost 2 years or more. He obviously fought it back then. He immediately applied for that. And it was one of the first times a commission has done that. And I believe that was the CSAC, which is, in my opinion, one of the better officiating bodies. And they overturned it. But the fact that it is so rare for officiations or the officiating bodies to overturn bad stoppages, like it kind of feels like they want to protect the referees. And I understand it's a hard job, it's a stressful job, but their actions have serious repercussions. And to a lesser extent, it's a financial one where if you lose by, like, let's say he never gets that overturned, right? Chess Kelly loses out on a win bonus. His record is hurt substantially. He goes down in the ranking. He, depending on where he is in his contract, that's a massive negotiating tool. That fundamentally can adjust a person's career. Because in football, again, normal sports, you play tons of games relative to MMA. So in MMA, you might fight, I don't know, we've seen guys retire with 10, 15 fights. Well, most guys, I'd say, probably get into the 20 to 30 range. But that's a career. That's 2 fights a year, maybe. 3 sometimes. We got the odd guys out that do way more, but it's still probably right around that. So when you mess up one guy's fight, you can destroy his career in a lot of ways. And in this case, we're talking about brain damage. So when you get this wrong, you can change a man. And anyone who's done training in any, like, boxing extensively, serious sparring, when you get hit, it can do things to you. And you've seen people that have changed, which is in turn why you see people like Dan Hardy, Paul Felder get so upset sometimes. Joe Rogan's done this. Lots of people have done this. And you've seen this argument on Twitter. People will say that Herbert let him go out on a shield. You know, like the fighter thing. Oh, let him fight to the bitter end if he's unconscious. You hear, like, people say, like Mike Perry said, tons of fighters, like, let me go till I'm out. And I respect it. But this is a sport. And that shouldn't happen. So, in conclusion of just Dan Hardy's, like, actions, emotionally seeing a fighter who has been on the receiving end of stoppages like that, Hardy and Felder's anger and fear for Herbert is understandable. I don't think many of us would disagree with that. Is it professional? No, not really. But I don't think in their mind that's the point. I don't think that they cared. And I think we understand that's okay. Like, the bigger point is that I think that it's less important than the bad stoppage. I think the more grave situation is the bad stoppage. Now, but the UFC has announced they're going to be investigating Dan Hardy. And I think we know this might lead to a fine. Maybe, I mean, it could get him fired. I'd hope, personally, I hope not. Again, I think it's generally unprofessional to do that. But I think people need to look at the intent of his actions, even if he is out of line. I think people understand that is not the same as doing a lot of things. He didn't do a lot of things that people get away with that I consider much worse. I won't go into them. We've seen lots of sports professionals say some gross things, do some gross things, and they're still doing their sport or officiating. But to, like, fire him, I think would be gross and negligent, because I quite enjoy his commentary. It's a different vibe than what we usually get, and it's I don't know. I'm a fan of it personally, and I don't think this situation warrants any long-term punishment for Hardy. I hope it more reflects on other things we've mentioned. But since then, both Herb Dean and Dan Hardy have released statements following the event. Herb Dean actually doesn't think the stoppage was late at all, which I don't get. But again, I'm not a referee. I've never fought in the UFC. I don't know. It's hard to see his perspective. But let's his exact quote from Instagram was, "There's a fight that some people said could have been stopped earlier. Think it was stopped late. By no means was that a late stoppage." I disagree fundamentally with what he's saying. I'd love to hear more reasons why. I'd love to hear him break down why he thinks that, especially watching him watch video of it. And maybe he can explain in more detail, but I just don't get it. Dan Hardy released a very long statement. I won't read it all, but I think it's very important to read this very specific part of Hardy's statement. I'll have the whole thing on screen. "When I make a mistake, I look stupid on live TV. When a referee makes a mistake, people are left vulnerable and can be seriously damaged. That can be life-changing. And we all have someone to go home to that loves us and wants us back in one piece." Again, this echoes what I feel. Hardy is being unprofessional. But back to point one, if we agree it's a bad stoppage and a gross one, you understand it. And you understand that his mistake in being unprofessional isn't nearly as big of a mistake as a bad stoppage. And as Dave Doyle said, and he said this in other tweets and other people have said, wait for the officials to take it over. They'll review it, blah, blah, blah. But the thing is, a lot of people don't trust the officials. A lot of people don't trust, like, there's a lack of trust. And so you can see why Dan, and in the immediacy, Dan doesn't care if Herb Dean gets reprimanded. He doesn't think Dan Hardy doesn't think Herb Dean is a bad guy. He thinks he's human and makes mistakes. But he does not think Herb Dean is a bad person. He doesn't think he's a negligent referee. He doesn't think any of these things. But in the moment where a mistake of this magnitude is being made, it seems like the only thing you can do. But to watch someone be hit unconscious like that, or semi-conscious, whatever, that might have been the only path. He wanted that stopped as fast as he could get it to save the guy, and I understand that totally. What do you think about Dan Hardy and Paul Felder's reaction, and what do you think about their statements following it? Because, again, Herb Dean has committed to saying he thinks it was not a bad stoppage, and Dan Hardy has come out and he's explained his behavior, and I explained the most important bit, to me at least, and I hope that frames it in a better way. But before we go, a small fact is the last time Jai Herbert was stopped or lost in professional MMA was against Reese McKee, the guy who fought Chimaev later on in the card, which is pretty crazy. It's kind of interesting that both were fighting, and that was the last guy to finish him and defeat him. But yeah, what do you think about this whole situation, and where do we go from here?